August 31st, 1994, Clinton Township, Michigan. A Geiger counter screams its electronic warning into the night air. Officer Kenneth Polk stares at his dashboard in disbelief. The radiation readings are off the charts. He steps out of his patrol car and approaches a beat-up Pontiac 6000, where a sweating teenager clutches a black duffel bag. Inside that bag sits a device quietly leaking enough radiation to kill someone. The teenager's name is David Hahn. He's 17 years old, an Eagle Scout. And tonight, he may have just triggered a nuclear disaster in suburban Detroit. This is the story of how a curious kid with a chemistry set nearly irradiated Michigan. David Hahn wasn't your typical suburban teenager. While his classmates obsessed over comics, video games, or movies, David was consumed by something far more dangerous: the power locked inside atomic nuclei. It started with a Christmas gift. At age 10, David's father handed him a chemistry set, expecting maybe some colorful reactions and a few kitchen table explosions. Instead, David devoured the accompanying manual like it was the most fascinating novel ever written. His bedroom transformed into a laboratory. But David's true inspiration came from a book that would be banned in today's safety-conscious world: The Golden Book of Chemistry Experiments. The book mentioned nuclear reactions almost casually, as if splitting atoms was just another step up from mixing baking soda and vinegar. For a brilliant but naive teenager with unlimited time and no adult supervision, that casual mention became an obsession. David's goal wasn't destruction. It was recognition. He wanted to become the youngest person ever to create a nuclear reactor. So he began what he called Project Alpha. David's mother, Patty, worked double shifts as a dental hygienist. His father lived across town with his new wife. This gave David something most teenage experimenters could only dream of: complete, unsupervised access to a 10 by 10 foot potting shed in the backyard. David had learned that smoke detectors contained americium-241, a radioactive element perfect for his reactor. Over 6 months, David accumulated over 300 smoke detectors. When clerks asked why a teenager needed so many, David had his story ready. He was an Eagle Scout helping local seniors install safety equipment. He'd carefully extract the americium-241 from each one, using techniques found in chemistry journals at the public library. But for his reactor, David needed uranium, and shockingly, he figured out how to get it legally. Uranium ore was readily available through scientific supply companies, marketed to mineral collectors and schools. All David needed was a convincing story. So, he created one. Using a computer at his high school, David designed official-looking stationery for a fictitious nuclear physics research institute. He wrote letters claiming to be a college professor conducting legitimate research. And incredibly, it worked. Companies shipped him uranium ore, thorium dioxide, and other radioactive compounds through regular mail. By summer 1994, David's innocent-looking garden shed housed radiation levels 1,000 times higher than normal background readings. David had been working for 18 straight hours, carefully arranging uranium ore around a core of americium-241, using aluminum foil as a neutron reflector. His Geiger counter, purchased through the same fake professor scheme, was registering radiation levels that should have sent him running. But David wasn't thinking about safety. He was thinking about history. According to his calculations, he was on the verge of achieving sustained nuclear fission, the steady, controlled chain reaction that powers nuclear plants worldwide. If he succeeded, he'd become the youngest person ever to split atoms outside a government facility. But at 2:15 a.m., something unexpected happened. The Geiger counter's needle suddenly pegged at maximum. David had achieved what nuclear engineers call criticality, the point where a nuclear reaction becomes self-sustaining. David had no way to stop what he'd started. In a moment of pure panic, He did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed the core of his reactor with his bare hands and pulled it apart. The radiation dose he received would have been deadly if sustained for minutes longer. David realized he'd created a far bigger problem. The shed was now so radioactive, it couldn't be safely entered without protective equipment. The surrounding soil was contaminated. Even David himself had become a walking radiation source, dangerous to anyone who came near him. He dismantled what he could, stuffed the radioactive components into a duffel bag, and started driving around Detroit at midnight, trying to figure out what to do next. Which brings us back to that traffic stop, with Officer Polk's Geiger counter screaming into the Michigan night. When FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen first read the report about a teenager with radioactive materials, she thought someone was pranking her. Teenagers don't build nuclear reactors. That's impossible. But Geiger counters don't lie. Within 24 hours, Chen found herself leading a task force involving the FBI, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, EPA, and Department of Energy. Federal investigators, clad in full radiation suits, discovered David's shed emitting dangerously high radiation, walls contaminated from months of experiments, and a workbench glowing like a continuous X-ray machine. Inside, detailed lab notebooks revealed meticulous, advanced nuclear research far beyond amateur tinkering. The investigation escalated to national security, triggering a costly EPA cleanup involving hazmat crews and soil removal. Despite the demolition and containment of the radioactive site, David remained convinced he was a legitimate scientist, indifferent to the laws he'd broken or the danger he posed. Public reaction was complex. Some viewed David as a dangerous lunatic who nearly irradiated Michigan. Others saw him as a misguided genius, failed by an educational system that couldn't channel his talents. David sat in his father's living room, staring at federal charges that could send him to prison for 20 years. But what bothered David more than potential prison time was the scientific injustice. His breeder reactor could have revolutionized clean energy. Instead, his work was being buried in classified reports. His attorney negotiated a plea deal. David would avoid prison in exchange for complete cooperation with investigators. He'd surrender all research notes, submit to radiation monitoring, and never work with radioactive materials again without government permission. David Hahn never built another reactor. In 2016, David Hahn died at age 39. The official cause was alcohol poisoning, not radiation exposure. In an age where information wants to be free and teenage prodigies have access to knowledge that once required security clearances, David Hahn's story serves as both inspiration and warning. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows just enough to be brilliant, but not enough to be wise.